My name is Raymond Hain, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this academic year's first event of the Providence College Humanities Forum. I'm a member of the Philosophy Department and the Humanities program here at PC, and the director of the forum. An initiative of the Providence College Humanities program, the forum's primary purpose is to provide regular opportunities for the entire campus community to consider some of the deepest human things. Our schedule is coordinated with the DWC timeline, emphasizes interdisciplinary humanistic reflection within the context of the Catholic and Dominican tradition, and at the same time seeks to integrate, whenever possible, a wide range of departments and programs across campus. Our hope is always that the forum will foster, deepen, and enrich our common life together. The forum is now in its 7th year, and we've had the honor of hosting a broad range of events, including guest speakers, film screenings, music performances, debates, and panel discussions. Keep an eye out for our regular announcements, and you can always check our website for recordings of past events and information about our upcoming schedule. We have an exciting series planned for this academic year, including Pulitzer Prize-winning scholar David Blight, a film screening and discussion of the documentary Outcasts, hosted by the director, and the first debate in our new Disputatio series. I hope many of you will join us regularly, and I wish you the best as we begin this new academic year. It's now my pleasure to welcome to the podium Professor Sandra Keating, a member of PC's Theology Department and the Humanities Forum Committee, to introduce today's distinguished guest.
Good afternoon. It's really great to see so many students here. I think we're all happy to be back on campus, in person, face to face, and so I'm really excited that our first speaker today is someone who I've wanted to bring to campus for years. I'm just really excited that she's here today, and I'm looking forward to her lecture. When I printed out her CV to try to decide what to say, it was so long, it was very difficult to make a decision about what I should say, so I'll just pull out a few things that I think would be of interest to all of us who are interested in the humanities, and especially DWC students. She got her undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan in classical languages and literature, and then studied classical philology at Harvard University. And since then, she's been a visiting professor, visiting researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, Yale Divinity School, Wesleyan University, our own Brown University, where she was here from 2012 to 2018, and currently at the University of Pennsylvania again. She has taught in many different places, but I think one thing, if you read any of her material, you will something that will stand out is her time in South Africa. She was at the University of Cape Town as a lecturer in the 90s, has taught at the University of Kansas, has been a volunteer teacher in South Africa in the Education and Environment Project. She has also published a great deal and is well known as a translator. The Gospels, a new translation, which just came out. St. Augustine's Confessions, as many of you Civ students will know. And a book that she's going to be talking about today, the themes of the face of water, a translator on beauty and meaning in the Bible. Along with that, she has won many writing honors, the Robert Silvers Grant for Work in Progress, Whiting Foundation Creative Nonfiction Grant, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and was a finalist for Christianity Today Awards in Theology and Ethics. And I could go on and on and on with her publications, but I would rather hear from her instead. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Sarah Ruden.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I am so delighted to be here. I have not had a chance to visit in person and lecture since the pandemic shutdown was starting. I got in just a couple of days before the shutdown, and I was lecturing to the Augustinian brothers. Well, it was more like lunch in Pennsylvania, and I had a very warm reception there. They wanted to know, what about Augustine made me uncomfortable as a Quaker? And they were really sincerely wanting to know this. So I thought, I like Augustine a lot. And I said, well, that painting, with the crown and the halo and the robe, and that's not really, very Quakerly. So they led me all around the monastery until there were many images of Augustine, and we finally found one that I just loved, very plain, youthful. Anyway, that was delightful, and I'm very delighted now to be with you and experiencing this warm welcome from another Catholic community. I thought that an appropriate topic in this case would be the joyful noises that people make together. Can everybody hear me? Okay. As in Psalm 100. I speak, however, from the point of view of an unprogrammed Quaker. Our sect has been worshiping in silence since the mid-17th century, and all vocal ministry breaking through that silence is supposed to be brief and to come from a new prompting of the Holy Spirit, suited to the very moment in the life of the community. Quoting from memory is tolerated, but reading from a text is frowned on because, what? You brought it along and planned to read it? Naughty. Or rather, unquakerly. Meeting for worship, much like meeting for worship with a purpose for business, is supposed to unfold mostly unpredictably, though with some ordinary parameters. Business meetings do have agendas, for example. Sometimes unpredictably doesn't describe it. Sometimes it's more like a parody of Jesus' admonition in Matthew 10:19 and Luke 12:11. Take no thought of what ye shall say. Imagine if homilies were not composed or even thought about beforehand, and if they were informed by things like the weather and the state of the building's repair. In fact, a Quaker in Cape Town, South Africa, who was on the building committee, combined both these inspirations by declaring, God maketh the rain to fall on the just and the unjust, but no longer in this room. My irony is not a condemnation of my own tradition. Quakers believe that our paths as communities are cut through boredom, flakiness, annoyance, stubbornness, giggles, and sheer wrongheadedness. The first and continuous thing we forgive each other for is being human and for stumbling on the way to love and insight. And the main thing we offer our members, attenders, and other associates is the help of an egalitarian group in balancing out individual impulses. But one vital thing that was missing from historical Quakerism, a thing that modern, unprogrammed Quakerism only tacks onto its exterior, is the joyful noise. Meetings of any size, and with anyone musically inclined in attendance. Now, the Quaker meeting is our basic church unit. So it's from 3 to 200 people or so. It's the equivalent of a parish. If anybody is musically inclined, then that person tends to find himself in a separate meeting for singing, which is open to all friends who in this place can sing in keys known and newly invented. But Quaker institutions such as schools and retreat centers may find themselves with martinet musical instructors able to produce concert-level sound from classical scores. And I just remember the choir director at Quaker, at Pendle Hill Quaker Study Center, and she told this joke, along with many other jokes. Knock, knock. Control freak. Now you say control freak. In between these extremes are hobby enterprises like the Free Grace, Undying Love, Full Gospel Quaker Choir Sing and Be Saved, which informed us, we're the kind of friends who sit in silent prayer. We're not the ones with missionaries everywhere, so you can bet we were surprised when God said, get off your butts and go evangelize. At the far end of the spectrum of musical frustration is the kind of behavior Quakers put under the joking head of breaking out. The all-night dance party, the inward-facing, shaped note singing mob that creates a thunderstorm of sound that you have to be cowering inside to appreciate. I teased my husband for his admiration of Liverpool soccer fans' habit of serenading the players with the song, You'll Never Walk Alone. This on YouTube sounds like a lot of happy drunken yelling, a musical note distinguishable once in a while. Now Quakers, if they were there, Quakers would be all in until the crowd finished singing and started swinging at each other, because Quakers are strict pacifists. But the mood among Quakers is more muted, so to speak, than usual these days. We're reminded more and more of how we came to worship in silence. It was because our sect began during the era of the English Civil Wars, when violence rose again and again on the pretext or provocation of performative culture. Centuries-old debates about scripture and liturgy had come to a head in this era. There's a plaque in St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, for example, commemorating a woman called Jane Geddes, who, according to legend, began a riot by heaving a stool at the dean of the cathedral when he tried to read from the 1637 Book of Common Prayer, an Anglo-Catholic work that was not pleasing to Scots steeped in Presbyterian doctrine. Now, early Quakers were mainly laborers and small tradesmen, but included a few powerful people trying to navigate the civic, spiritual, and moral hazards of the time. This odd group showed themselves to be the first strictly pacifist British community, and they showed this through the peace testimony of 1660 and similar documents. The full, hey, leave us out of it, title of the peace testimony, which is a letter sent to Charles II, is a declaration from the harmless and innocent people of God called Quakers against all plotters and fighters in the world for the removing of the ground of jealousy and suspicion from both magistrates and people in the kingdom concerning wars and fighting, so please don't hurt us. Okay, that's my addition, that last piece. Okay, in this letter, to which they still allude, Quakers utterly deny physical fighting and material weapons as unchristian. As far as I can tell, silent worship was intricately bound up in the spirit of the peace testimony and was a self-conscious opposition to Puritan argumentative rhetoric and other literature on the one side, and on the other side, royalist prescriptions for ritual. But an even more powerful incentive was probably that Quakers soon had internal power struggles going on. And they must have seen that if they fought among themselves in this environment, they would never make it. Part of the appeal that primitive Christianity, that's their term for it, held for them was the free-form meeting for worship in which everyone was permitted to speak out of personal inspiration, and a leader like Paul in the Bible was reduced to pleading with and persuading people not to babble nonsensically. That's what you find in 1 Corinthians 8. He's basically saying, look, speaking in tongues, great, yeah, I can speak in tongues with the best of them. We need something beyond that, please. Our Quaker founder, George Fox, had a somewhat sterner confrontation with an adherent of the ranter strain of Quakers. Now, certain Quakers had decided that it was too authoritative to speak in grammatical and sensible English. So if you could understand somebody, that was not good. So it kind of didn't do the Quakers a lot of good, in their reputation and their cohesion during the early years, that some people were just screeching and babbling. So yes, like the primitive Christians, Quakers soon found they needed more structure. And they found this structure, interestingly, in their administration, in the way they ran business, and not in the way they conducted meeting for worship so much. So what they did was they had an extremely egalitarian, flat administrative structure. There was nobody, literally nobody in charge. The clerk of the meeting could not lead the meeting. He could not suggest anything to the meeting without standing aside, literally, physically standing aside and say, I'm not the clerk now. I think we should do this. Anyway, but the meeting for worship itself remained without liturgy, without a fixed structure to it. There was still mostly silence. And I discovered the value of this in a crisis when I heard about 9/11 for the first time. I had flown from Cape Town, South Africa, to the Quaker Study Center, Woodbrook, in Birmingham, England, to start learning about classical Hebrew in the original language. I got through my short course, and I had a day to spare afterwards. So I hiked over to the Cadbury theme park, which celebrates the famous Quaker model factory and experiment in the decent treatment of workers. When I returned to the study center in the late afternoon, an American Quaker had been delegated to break the terrible news to me. A little later in the day, a Quaker friend from town arrived, and we had plans to go out, but of course we weren't going to go out. We said virtually nothing. What we did was we spent the whole evening walking around the garden and crying and saying a few words to try to comfort each other, because we both kind of knew that the world as we had grown up in it was ruined. There would be a long war, and there would be much worse. So we walked around and around the Woodbrook Gardens, arm in arm, just weeping. And I found that in the study center and at my Quaker meeting back in Cape Town, no one could speak or even tried to speak to the enormity of what had happened or of what was ahead. In America, of course, public concerts started as soon as they could be organized. Musicians sang themselves hoarse and played until their fingers bled, so as not to let people down, as they said, so as not to stop the inspiration they were supposed to need at this point. And with the exception of, in my opinion, one Bruce Springsteen song that has been almost universally ignored, the aesthetic and political nexus of mourning and rallying after the attack has been less than edifying. One song inspired by 9/11 contains the word, "'Cause we'll put a boot in your ass, it's the American way." So where does all of this leave me as a Quaker translator of the Bible, often tasked with digging inspiration out of Scripture for community performance? That is performance in other people's communities. And the second to last in-person church visit I made before the pandemic lockdown, that's in February of 2020, was to a group of Presbyterian clergy and educators in West Virginia who wanted me to help them interpret and adapt the Bible for the needs of people there. For example, women these conferees counseled regularly refused to take their children and flee from homes where a male partner had threatened them with a shotgun because they had been told that the Bible commanded them to stay and die just because this was their partner. Now, had I known what was hoped for from me, I would have stayed away, saying, if you think that the Bible can or should be the mediator in these situations, then it's up to you to tell me how. I'm not going to tell you. I don't know. As things were, I had to figure out on the spot what to offer. 2.5 days passed, and I had nothing. On the final morning, I came up with the idea of giving each small working group an updated, more accurate English translation of a line of the 23rd Psalm. Every single line of the Psalm has got some, what I think of as an immense inaccuracy in it. You could see, if you like, you could see my book, Face of Water, and I go through piece by piece and tell how outrageously wrong, if you look at a standard Bible translation, things are, how imprecise. For example, it's not just green pastures, it's the pastures with the fresh, new, brilliant greens. There's chartreuse grass. That's a special word in Hebrew. It's not just, green pastures, they're green. No, this is the freshest pastures of spring. Anyway, so I wrote all this stuff down and I parceled it out. Then the idea machine started to roar. There were marvelous openings of sermons and Sunday school lessons, and 2 women who led a group of teenage girls came up with the game of Mercy Tag. So what you do in Mercy Tag, you pass out cards reading, for instance, I heard something terrible about another girl and I put it on the internet. Or I had sex with my boyfriend. Each girl who reads a fictional confession is then run down and mobbed with hugs and encouraging words, because mercy doesn't just follow you, according to the psalm, it runs you down. It chases you mercilessly to your lair. The verb is run off. It's not about following along. No, it's about running you down. So in the demonstration of this game, highly respected adults were running, shrieking around the room with their peers hot on their heels to love bomb them. So this was, going to work with kids. So that event certainly turned out more productively than any attempt I ever made to convince Quakers that they should have a look at the Bible, that it might lend them spiritual or moral insight or suggest useful questions or at least tell them something interesting about the history of their culture. The attempt to run a short course of my own at Woodbrook, so I went back years later to Birmingham, it came as near to getting me run out of town on a rail as a Quaker organization could possibly come, I think. And it was therefore many years my mission to visit culturally mainstream and theologically conforming Christians because they wanted to hear from me. It could be a lot like the Far Side cartoon, which is captioned "Animal Nerds." So in this cartoon, there's this goofy-looking wolf. They're 2 wolves they're crouching in wait for this, or they're stalking antelope out there. And there's this goofy-looking wolf coming up behind them, and he says, "Hey, hi guys, what's going on?" Anyway, that's what I felt like. So at the worst, since it was never my pack, they couldn't make me sleep outside the den in a howling gale or prevent me from ever mating or anything. They were very accepting. Quite seriously, as a Quaker Bible translator, I wrote my book, Face of Water, Translator on Beauty of Meaning in the Bible, hoping that Quakers would read it, but I don't know of a single one who ever did. The book is basically about joyful noises in Scripture. I was trying to vindicate an ancient principle that I still think is powerfully descriptive. And it's the happy version of the nexus between form and content that Plato both dreaded and wished to exploit. Okay, so in the, most of you will not have read The Republic yet, but Plato in The Republic writes about the mysterious and, he thinks, holy power of sound. It's sort of this unspeakable kind of magic that poetry, music works on people. And because it's so powerful, then the state had better not just let it run around amok among people and influence them to do this or that or the other thing. No, the state must control music, poetry, and use it for its own ends, particularly for getting people hyped up to fight a neighboring state. Anyway, that's Plato's version of it, and it's a rather it was fairly sensible premise, about the power of sound, but horrifying conclusion and prescription. Anyway, I think it's very true, and it was even more true in the ancient world that meaning and sound are bound up together. And sound, meaning, and action. Texts were the rock music of the day. They were even more than that. It was not a visual culture. It was an oral culture. People reacted to sound. They wouldn't. I mean, here's a sort of weird thing to think about. It was very, very common to have awful eyes, to have eye disease for a good part of your life and not really be able to see much of anything. And of course, glasses had not been invented. There was no medicine that could address eye problems. People literally couldn't see very well. But there seems to have been nothing wrong with their hearing. So that may have been part of the influence. Also, they did not have a technology, of course, to create the kind of images that we can create, to create them easily, to propagate them. No, they just weren't there materially. Anyway, sound and meaning very much bound up in ancient literature. And, but it's still true today. So secular illustration that I used in The Face of Water, imagine how the change in the meaning of the State of the Union address, imagine how that is changed. Back up a little bit. So this experience is particularly powerful if it's delivered through performance in a community. That context of the performance is extremely important. So the illustration that I used was, you have the State of the Union address, consider it in the normal setting, and consider it being performed by a comic actor in a tutu. It's a completely different thing. The meaning is changed 180 degrees. So we have obvious biblical examples. You have acrostic psalms, and acrostic means they're presenting the Hebrew alphabet in order. In this case, acrostic is you have the letter down, you're going down one side, and the first letter in each line is significant, and you read down, you read vertically. So in these acrostic psalms, they present the Hebrew alphabet in order. with one letter at the start of each verse. These psalms present specific religious messages in a form that glorifies the miracle of language and writing. This must originally have been a sort of triple synergy. Hebrew poetry's special imagery and rhythms emphasize the power of language. That's number one. The content of the psalm stresses what that language is for. Number two, glorifying God in his incomparable power. And the performers, whether school children, a Levite choir singing in the temple, or others, add the power and enthusiasm and skill of their voices. So you are heightening this text through the performance. Some of the most beautiful psalms have refrains. My favorite, I think, is Psalm 136, which has the refrain, "His steadfast mercy endures forever." And that goes, well, all of the settings, the musical settings are modern. We don't have any of the original ones. But a modern setting that I like is Hodu ladonai kito, kile olam hasto, kile olam hasto. So these are danceable. And when I was learning Hebrew, we learned a lot of these. They are supremely danceable, and that's how they are reflected today in Jewish ritual. If you have Simchat Torah, which is it's the festival in which you celebrate the gift of the Torah, the gift of the law to humankind. So you dance with the Torah scroll, and you have a whooping good time. The dance is mandated. So this is particularly interesting to me as a classicist. These verses were doing the same sonorous, peppy kind of thing that the poet Virgil was doing in his early breakthrough poem, the Eclogues. In high literature at the time, you don't have refrains. You're reading, I understand you're reading Homer right now, so you basically just have this sort of sonorous, very formal poetry. Maybe you have some formulae, but you don't. It's not like a song. You don't have refrains, and even in lyric poetry, you don't have. You usually do not have refrains. So Virgil starts using refrains, and it got him elevated to rock star status, because there were these lines. I mean, think of the song that really turns your crank. That you're going to be humming. You've been to a concert, you're going to be humming something for the rest of the evening. This was it. And he did this, so he's pulling these things from folklore, and sticking them into, fairly prestigious poetry. And it got his status to shut up like nobody's business. And he became a sort of God figure. It is really weird. I'm working on a biography of him, and he is not very long after his death, like 300 years or so after his death, he's a Moses figure. He's a prophet, and he's a magician. He becomes, and then of course in Dante, he is, Virgil is the guide through all of the universe short of paradise. So the whole thing, I'm convinced, was based on his uncanny ability to make people hum, to make people remember exactly, what it was he wrote, and he wrote it repeatedly. So the most beautiful lines are repeated again and again, as in many hymns. My career as an exponent of the Bible for more conservative, more politicized Christian institutions came to a screeching, skidding halt with the election of Donald Trump, because none of those people seemed to be able to answer my basic question, what would you not look away from in order to share this man's power? The Trump administration therefore found me in a much different mood as I went about researching and writing my next book on the Bible, a new translation of the Gospels. I thought, frankly, that it would be good if I could throw a small wrench into the publicity machine by now asking some offensive questions, or questions that I believed to be offensive, about some of the stylistic features that I had praised before, such as repetition, such as the powerful refrain, such as the, whatever sound that is, it gets the whole crowd swaying and excited, and heaped up or hyped up and ready for action. I'd been charmed by repetition in Ezekiel, and as I wrote about it in Face of Water, now I suggested that the gospel according to John had gone way too far and in fact established a template for populist propaganda that we're still living with. Well, let me tell you how that turned out. There's an Edith Wharton short story called Expiation. It's about a society matron who has published her first novel and would love to shake things up a bit, to somehow overcome the embarrassment that she has, and it's called A Well-Filled Nursery, and loves her uxorious husband. He loves her quite ridiculously. She loves him back, appreciates him. She has a very, decent and happy family life. But she's bored with this. She's restless. She wants to rebel a little. But she really doesn't want to hurt anybody she's fond of or respects, or to seriously upset the staid, fashionable world she lives in. So she calls her novel Fast and Loose. And she waits in trepidation for the reviews. She's not sure that she wants them to excoriate her or what, or excuse her. What does she really want? She just wanted to do this. Okay. But the reviews concur in praising the freshness, purity, and innocence of the novel's portrait of domestic life. So she really, when it came down to it, she could not do it. She could not write something that was worthy of that title. So she is crushed. But she is also swooningly relieved that it wasn't another kind of review that her husband has eagerly read out loud to her uncle, the bishop, who has dropped in to complain that his own elevating contribution to literature is not selling, so as to finance a new stained glass window. So, yeah, I ended up feeling kind of like her. As I fielded one testimonial after the other about how useful my translation is in preaching and teaching, Bible study, prayer, and meditation. And I have no uncle who is a bishop and might, for a certain consideration, to be financed out of a sudden jump in sales, denounce my book from the pulpit. So here I am with the renewed, quite unquakerly experience that the Bible has a power and integrity that endures in spite of its readily demonstrable weaknesses as a historical, scientific, ethical, and even literary document. And I've got no suggestions for how to understand or employ the Bible at a time of political crisis. My one self-interested suggestion is that you explore every new translation that isn't a transparent, personalized hack job or a crib from the established tradition of English versions. If you do this, you may find yourself more challenged and engaged by what the Bible is saying. I know that some of you are looking forward to hearing about the performance and aesthetics of Scripture from a theological perspective. Now, that's a good one. When the speaker is a Quaker who has read all the easier parts of C.S. Lewis and thinks that they're really kind of neat. Seriously, an obvious move is to apply the ancient Christian strictures about pleasures. They come from God, and they have to be distorted and made unpleasurable, a trap and a torment, before they are of use to the devil. In their wholesome and moderate forms, they point upward toward the divine. In the screw tape letters, the new convert is saved from temptation by taking a pleasant walk. He would presumably be lost if he couldn't get enough walking, if he walked as an addiction, and there's some people who actually do this. Charles Dickens was one of those people. Even the most innocent aesthetic enjoyments have to be tempered with self-awareness, as Augustine reminds us. I love a hymn that we sang at Yale Divinity School, which may be appropriate to the close of a lecture in any case. I don't know if my voice is holding out, but the words go, "How sweet the hours have passed away since we have met to sing and pray. How loath we are to leave the place where Jesus shows his smiling face. Oh, could I stay with friends so kind, how would it cheer my drooping mind? But duty makes me understand that we must take the parting hand." This hymn is in the Sacred Heart tradition, and in that tradition, centered on the eastern mountain regions, you may have an all-day or multi-day meeting for singing. That is, hundreds of people could get together, and they just sing like crazy. It's like a madness. It doesn't happen much anymore, but this is it's only in the revived tradition now. But and then this song is about how you have to back away from this. You have to back away from the emotion of it and go back to your normal life. How are we for time? Okay, yeah. I had a couple of things I wanted to read here. So, this is my first in-person lecture in a year and a half, so my apologies for my overexcitement and the jumbling of things here. So I thought that it might interest you to hear a couple of things, a couple of translations done in a different style, in a experimental, updated style based on my research into the original languages. So this is, see if you can recognize this chapter from Mark. From there he set off and went out into the region of Touros. He entered a house and didn't want anyone to know of his arrival, but he didn't manage to escape notice. On the contrary, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit in her heard about him right away and came and fell down at his feet. But the woman was Greek and Syro-Phoenicia by birth. That is, she is not Jewish. She is European in culture, and she's a non-Jewish Semitic person whom Jews particularly hated because the Phoenicians they practiced child sacrifice just way into the historical period, and Jews had eschewed that from a very, very early date, and that was part of what defined Jewishness. No, we don't commit human sacrifice. Anyway, so that's who this woman is. She asked him to expel the demon from her daughter, and he said to her, "First let the offspring eat their fill, as it's not right to take the offspring's loaf and toss it to the little doggies." But she answered back, telling him, "Master, even the little doggies under the table eat some of the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "Because of what you just said, get out of here. The demon has left your daughter." Then she went back to her house and found her child lying on the bed, and the demon had left her. So that's what the Greek says, kunaria. It doesn't say kunes, dogs. It says little doggies. It's a word from comedy. It's a very rare word, but all the instances we have, this is a word that you would use in a joke or an insult. Okay. Here's another one. Let's see if you recognize this one. What can we say about these things? With God on our side, who can be on the other side? The God who didn't begrudge his own Son, but surrendered him for the sake of us all, how then will such a God not freely give us everything else along with him? Who will bring charges against those God has chosen to be in his charge? God is the one passing judgment. Who's the one rendering us guilty? It is Jesus the Anointed who died, came back to life. God's right hand, who actually intercedes for us. Who will separate us from the love of the Anointed One? Will it be any pressure put on us, or the tightest place imaginable, or persecution, or starvation, or the inability to put clothes on our backs, or danger, or execution? To quote the scriptures, because of you, we are dying all day long. We are counted off one by one like sheep for slaughter. But in all these things, we are the victors over the victors, thanks to the one who has loved us. I have been persuaded, you see, to believe that neither life, death, nor life, nor angels, nor the authorities on earth, nor things that are here now, nor things that are coming, nor supernatural powers, nor the highest, nor the lowest thing in the universe, nor anything else in creation, has the power to separate us from the love of God in the anointed Jesus, our Lord. Okay. Do we have questions now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
It's a really good place to end. Actually, you can stay here. So normally, what we'll do is we'll open it up. Usually we start with students, and there are lots and lots of students here today, so we'll begin with students asking questions of anything. You covered a lot of ground in there. There's lots and lots of things we can talk about, and if no one has a question, I have a question. So yes, go. Here, let me bring you the microphone.
So, you talked a lot about certain sections of the Bible which were mistranslated throughout history. In your opinion, which section of the Bible throughout history has been the most egregiously mistranslated or misused?
Well, that's a good question. Oh, my goodness. I have to pick one? Okay. I think Genesis is pretty bad. And I'll explain why I think that is historically. What we call the Old Testament came together as authoritative writing. It came together as a collection of writings during the Babylonian exile. So Jewish scholars had been brought into exile, first by the Babylonians, but then under Persian sponsorship, Persians took over from the Babylonians, and they sponsored the creation of what we know of as Jewish scripture. And it was assembled from all different sources. There's probably not a lot that existed in a finished form. It's probably Deuteronomy, probably some other things. Had a sort of traditional established, they'd been there for a long time and were used actually ritually and in the law, in the administration of the law. Deuteronomy was probably one. There probably wasn't much else. So they just started grabbing things and pulling them together. And they did not have a creation story. They did not have one of their own. So they turned to their neighbors and they said, okay, what kind of things are said about the creation of the world? Well, we like this one, we like that one. And so they're pulling all kinds of stuff in. And that's why Genesis is a really goofy book. It's not anchored the way that stories about the patriarchs are anchored, the way that stories about Jewish history are anchored. There isn't that hard foundation. So, Genesis is really a hoot. For example, the words that are translated as the couple were naked and the snake was sly. It's a little rhyme. In Hebrew, the best translation of the Hebrew is the couple were nude, but the snake, he was shrewd. That's exactly how you would do it correctly. So all of this is glossed over in standard translation. They don't think it's respectful to call it as they see it. I think the opposite. It's not respectful to rewrite what's plainly there. There was also, there's other stuff in more serious. There are more serious distortions in Genesis, and I was just consulted a couple weeks ago by someone she was gonna give a lay sermon, and about the dominion verse. God orders mankind to have dominion over all the world. And she'd been reading stuff about, how it doesn't mean dominion, it means to care for, mankind must care for the world. And so I had a look, and it's not even something as gentle as dominion. It means stomping into the ground. That's what that verse means. It's a pun, of course. You are to stomp the earth into the ground. It's kind of a joke, and it's based on the language of subjugating people. You stomp them down, and you make them do your bidding. You destroy them if they get out of line. It's from the Near Eastern language of conquest. It's used all over the Hebrew Bible, so we know exactly what it means. I think you got to translate that. If it makes you uncomfortable, then deal with it. It's not something to put it aside. This is the reality of what that text says.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I want to talk to you more about that because I've always read the other interpretation as well. So that's really that was an excellent question. Who else? Do we have other questions here? Someone else brave enough to raise their hand? Dr. Green. Yes. Sure. Just hold on so that you can be on the.
Okay. So, do we have a Hebraist back there who's gonna?
No, I just want a quick follow up to that.
Sure.
Your what you said about the dominion interpretation. Isn't later in Genesis 3 when Eve's consequence is that her husband shall have dominion over her? Is that the same verb?
I would have to look.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. But you see, this was one thing that I found, and the lay preacher, my friend, and that we were both finding very uncomfortable, that this is a feminine noun, the land, in this case. So stomping this female thing into the ground, not a good image. And you have parallels. It's not the same verb, but you have parallels in Lamentation when you're talking about an invasion and a conquest where the women get raped.
Anyone? We have another question? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like I have to stand up for the centuries and millennia of people who have translated the Bible. Are you arguing for some conspiracy or just ignorance that people don't know their own languages? Because people throughout the centuries have been translating these with a relatively deep knowledge of the language. So I'm a little curious of what the claim is here.
Okay, I wouldn't make a general claim. I think there are thousands of different things going on. With each, you don't have, till the time of Augustine, you don't have like a formal translator who comes forth and says, yes, okay, I'm studying this and I'm doing the correct version. And you have that in St. Jerome, of course. Before this, you have people just kind of scrambling to get these texts in a readable form for an audience that's very eager to find them, to get access to them. So I do not think a pejorative language of conspiracy, of blame, manipulation. I don't think it really works very well when you posit what must have been going on. If I want to find out about the root of a Hebrew verb and the imagery behind it and all its context, all the different ways that it's used in this really very limited corpus, there are online resources. I can tap in that question and get an answer in 30 seconds. What are people doing in an era when there are no lexicons? And what you would call a lexicon would be just the weirdest, strange words that we pull out of some esoteric literature, and readers literally don't know, never seen this word before, so they need the grammarian's lexicon just to get some basic access. But for ordinary words, there's no map that people can draw on, such as we have. So, to imagine that people were consciously manipulating, falsifying things, I think that is not justified. I hope I have never used that language. But, now that we have all these resources, I would think that we should be a little bolder in going toward the nitty-gritty of these texts. If we can actually see an original image and see it play out in this fantastic wordplay, which is related to the meaning of the text, then I would be for going for that.
Okay, we're at 4 o'clock, and I know that there are some of you that need to leave at 4 o'clock. So I'm going to bring this to an end. There is a reception in the great room, and we have the doors open out into the patio. Please let us thank our speaker for a very productive talk. Thank you for coming.